candid camera.
Yeah.
Good afternoon,
Hi.
sir.
And the date is September 21st,
Yes.
2009.
2009.
And we're sitting here in the backyard of my home at 3875 Mulfair Drive. And we've never done this before. We've never done this before, but we're going to try to have
an intelligent conversation without laughing too much.
yeah. So you were telling me about some of these war pictures that got stolen.
Yeah, there's a whole gap in my life. I had a series of war pictures of the planes I took care of, and the pilots and the gunners, the flight engineer were in those pictures. That is part of the crew.
Right.
And there was like two waist gunners right and left, and a nose gunner in the actual nose of the airplane. There was an area where the guy had a machine gun, and he could rotate about, I'd say, more than 180 degrees. He couldn't go all the way around because he'd probably shoot the tail off the plane. But there also was a tail gunner. There were 4 guys there: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and a so-called flight engineer. That was a fellow, in case they had some trouble with one of the engines. He would instruct them how to shut it down and feather the props, which means that they were no longer in a flight mode. They would be turned at 90 degrees to in line with the flight path, so it wouldn't offer any resistance on the engine as we were flying. All those were little things. There were different guys who knew how to land a plane, not on one tire, but several tires. Most of the pilots were pretty competent, but there were a couple of them that, let's put it this way, if they were driving cars, they'd be weaving in and out and in traffic.
This is with or without alcohol?
With no alcohol. Maybe they had some dried potato chips, but they certainly had alcohol.
And where were you stationed then?
Well, in every place I was at, from one end of the New Guinea to the other, was we had an airfield, Port Moresby. That's not quite correct. Well, they first landed in the eastern tip of New Guinea. The other end of it, Arthur, is as much distance as it is from New York to San Francisco. This is no small island.
New Guinea.
New Guinea. In the middle of it was a gigantic mountain that ran down the backbone of the whole place. And the Japanese, after the Americans had invaded it, half of the island was known as Dutch New Guinea, and the eastern half was English or Australian. But the point about it is that I'm talking about the distinction. The Japanese retreated from the island and then later tried to come back down. And they landed their ships on the northern side of New Guinea and had various camps in Borum, Wewak.
Who had camps there?
The Japanese. And
So you guys were on one side of the island and they were on the other?
Right. We were adjacent to it all the way through.
Really?
And the Japanese were cut off from everything. They had to make do on the land. I mean, when they ran out of their supplies. But, we controlled the airspace, and consequently, the only way that they could come down and feed.
How could they get resupplied with ammunition?
Well, that was the whole problem. They had to actually, they had planes, cargo planes, dropping stuff with parachutes with a load. And when I first got to New Guinea, I'd been real active pre-war in negotiating contracts and things like that. I was going crazy, and in the sense that I didn't have anything to do. And I wound up on a ship, excuse me, trying to think of there were the ships that the U.S. was using, landing craft. It was like a big boat with twin diesel engines in it in the back, and the front end of it, the tailgate, was like a big rectangular tub, literally, except the front end of it was square. The gate fell down, and when there were troops on it, they would rush off onto land. In other words, they literally ran the ship when they landed in New Guinea. They deliberately landed as close as they could to the shoreline. So they landed, and all the guys ran off the thing with their arm onto land. And I ran an assembly line. The ships were made in Louisiana by Higgins, which was a big boat manufacturer. And they literally cut the boat in half, and then in two directions, north, south, east, and west. And the fifth part of the boat was just the front section was dropped down, and so they had to be reassembled when they got back down to New Guinea. And I was so bored, I volunteered to run the assembly line where the welding was done, and I would take it out into literally the ocean to see whether there were any leaks. We would take the boat out, and I would be down there in the hold and everything else like that around the engine to be sure there was no cracks or that there was solid welding, And then we moved north of that, and for the first time I picked up a squadron of B-24 bombers, which is a 4-engine bomber. We were flying towards the Solomon Islands and other places like that, where the Japanese had occupied it, and we bombed them. They came back, and the Japanese had anti-aircraft, and they nicked the planes, so we had sheet metal mechanics patching the planes, that kind of thing. But the level of accuracy of the anti-aircraft by the Japanese was very poor. In fact, I can't recall an incident where they actually did enough damage to a plane. The plane was crippled and couldn't come back to base. They were successful in shooting 50 caliber bullets through the sheet metal on the side, but we were that lucky that they never hit. And then we went up the coast, and we were in Hollandia, and which was a little island off off the coast of Virginia. And that's where I gained my first reputation as being one son of a bitch. uh, my commanding officer was crazy. When I say crazy, the squadron that we had was essentially a maintenance squadron. We weren't armed to do combat. And he had illusions that he was going to lead us into combat. God only knows what would have happened if that happened. And he was also, and that was one of the things that I really wanted to show you, is that picture. He was a nervous wreck that the Japanese were going to attack him. And what he did was he put sandbags in the front of, to get into his tent. He established a labyrinth to get into it. In other words, he had, if the tent, imagine the tent just a square building. He built, but let's say the entrance was over here. He built out of sandbags, a complete shelter to get into his tent. And he also had portholes on either side, the other two sides in his tent. There always were flaps in the tent for openings, but he had them all sandbagged too. And one day he, what do you call it? One day, since we were on an island by ourselves, there were a couple of infantrymen on guard on the possibility that the Japanese would send over a small ship at nighttime and attack us. And he was paranoid about that. And the reason he put those sandbags around the place was he was afraid that the Japanese were going to be on the island. The Japanese were like 500 miles away, or more, okay? And there was no way that they could land a plane on this island, which had all kinds of protection. When I saw that, and he had built this around it, bye-bye, have a good time. I said to the communications officer, this guy is nuts. I'm going to turn him. And I went down to what they call the Army Inspector's Ordinance. And I said to him, this guy is crazy. He was stealing machine guns out of the planes and putting in this armored tent that he had. He had stolen 3 machine guns. There are 4 portholes there. He had stolen 3. He only had 1 more machine gun. He stole them out of the combat planes. And the commanding officers at the said to me, who have you discussed this with? And that's a trap question. You can't, if you talk like I met you and you were equivalent rank to me, and I said to you, my commander is nuts, you could be court-martialed as being insubordinate. And I looked at the guys and I said to them, fellas, I work for the Ordnance District. I know what the word secret is, and you don't do things like that. If you talk about your commanding officer, they can ship you out. Well, they didn't pay any attention to it, all right? And at my request, I got transferred. And I got transferred to a squadron handling big bombers. That's how I got to meet. That's where I met J.J. O'Neill the first time. And which was another few hundred miles up the coast. And while I was there in the new place, my old squadron had also moved up the coast to another island. And sure enough, the squadron that I was in, I heard they were on the island. I was on the mainland, and I went to see him, and I knew the communications officer best. By the way, he was Jewish, and I said, "How's Cheatham doing?" And he says, "Didn't you hear?" And I said, "No." They said they caught him stealing some more machine guns out of a plane at nighttime. He used to go out and interfere at nighttime. Yeah. And they shipped him home on a Section 8. I said, I tried to get... I had foretold them in advance that this
Well, maybe they were watching him a little bit after that.
And oh yeah, they may have watched him.
They may have watched him more closely.
Yeah, but whatever it is, he got shipped out. And
can I just interrupt you for a
sure.
second? We're on the camera, and I want to just, it's a point, I want to just ask you occasionally to turn toward the camera and address the audience there as well as me.
Oh, okay.
If you don't mind.
I hope you all can hear me.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's good. You talk to them and you talk to me.
But anyway, at the same time that was going on, that was when MacArthur, who was captured by the Japanese, you know, he was the Ganzamacher in the South Pacific. You know, he was
captured by the Japanese?
Oh yeah, in the Philippines he was captured.
I didn't know that.
And he was, the Japanese captured him, and being such a high-ranking guy, his wife, he had a baby, and a nursemaid, okay, in the jail surrounding where he was kept by the Japanese. The Japanese were great in respecting rank, even if he was your enemy. So when he got out of jail, he was shipped to Hollandia, which was this island. Hollandia is one of the major cities, but this was in Dutch New Guinea, not in the Australian side. And when he got there, what do you think he did? He took all of our bulldozers and made a house, or excuse me, built a house, a white bungalow on the top of a mountain, okay, for his wife and kids, and paved the road with macadam. Can you believe that? In the meantime, we lost a couple of planes going down the runway on takeoff because with a full load of bombs, if the guy hadn't got enough speed by the end of the runway, they would run off the runway. Okay?
Let me ask you this, Dan. You're saying that he brought his wife and kids into the war zone?
Yes.
And put them on a big house on the top of the hill?
Yes. I'm not telling you bullshit. That's fact. That's MacArthur. That's why I had a big meeting with all the heads down there.
So how did you get a reputation of being anything that was worthwhile?
In one respect, he was a pretty sharp guy. He was the one that persuaded some of the generals that instead of trying to go out and capture every goddamn Japanese on the island, you know, and in a sense decimate them, so they couldn't combat, just leapfrog them out. In other words, he was a major guy in the strategy of the war that isolated. We were gaining aircraft control of the skies with our planes. The Japanese couldn't meet that, and as a result, he said, "Why not just isolate?"
Dan, what was your rank at this point?
Oh, I hate to tell you. When I turned my, I had antagonized my commanding officer in the States. I'll tell you what that story was. And as a result, whereas I should have been a captain when I went overseas, I was still a second lieutenant. In fact, I had an assistant warrant officer who actually outranked me, but he was
He was assigned to you?
He was assigned to me. He worked for me.
Dan, what year was this probably?
1942.
Okay. You know, there's so much ground to cover. We're only going to cover some of it today.
Yeah.
We're going to have more than one session. This was the point I was leading up to. Was a person in your position, which wasn't the lowest, but it certainly wasn't the highest, were you able to follow the progress of the war? In other words, were you aware of
Sure.
the strategy and how things were going?
Oh,
or
yeah.
it was just propaganda that you were hearing from the government? In other words, was there a sense that the American soldiers had a sense of how things were going and not going?
Oh, definitely so.
Yeah.
We know,
You had a feeling about the progress. It wasn't that you were just isolated there and had no sense of the larger picture.
oh no, quite the contrary. When I was stateside, I first got into trouble with my commanding officer. I had gotten out of engineering school. I was trained up there for 5 months. When I got into the squadron, I had B-17 bombers. By the way, I was trained in New Haven, Connecticut. I went to Yale University, and we were washing mahogany floors with water and soap. At Yale University, we domiciled there. We had a little Piper Club. It's one of these little planes that hops around in the sky now. As the only plane that we ever had. We never had everything else. We learned from a book. We didn't learn. It was no practical, no evidence that we had anything that was related to what our future job was. And I was sent to. We were right next to Grand Coulee Dam. I definitely thought they were prejudiced and didn't like Jews because I wound up in Moses Lake, Washington, which was about 100 miles west of Spokane, Washington, near the Grand Coulee Dam. And
what was that, the Willamette or Columbia River or something?
oh yeah, the Columbia River between Washington State and Oregon.
Okay.
And the point about the matter was that the commanding officer wanted to impress the commanding officer of my squadron, wanted to impress the group, what they call the group officers. In other words, we were a maintenance squadron, and he wanted to show how much he could take care of things. He brought a B-17 bomber in, and he came to see me and he said, we got to change a gas tank in the wing of the B-17 bomber. And I said, what are we going to do it with? Oh, he says, some step ladders and jacks. I said, you're going to have to take the wing off the plane. You can't do that. He says, well, we'll see. And he brought it in anyways. I went out to the plane and I did have a couple of jacks that we could hold up under the wing. But we had nothing to pull the wing off. And he said, I can give you anything you want. He says, I can give you a couple of more jacks, but you got to take the wing off. And I said to him, I'll be 180 years old before I'll have strength enough to do it. And he said, I don't think you want to make that kind of remark to me. I says, Captain, I'm telling you, I happen to be an engineer, and by the way, I do know what your background was. And I just left it at that. And of course, he didn't know, or maybe he thought I was bluffing. This guy actually sold undergarments for ladies in his regular life. But he was part of the reserve. And when he got called to duty, he was automatically a captain. I was only a crummy second lieutenant.
Right.
Anyway, so it was written up in my dossier that followed me around. I think it's called a 201 file. That I had lousy marks by my commanding officer, and that's why I was a captain, because the squadron tech guy called me. I was stayed a second lieutenant. I stayed a second lieutenant even at the whole squadron overseas. When I left in New Guinea, when I went to the first base there, at one of the fields, it was in Hollandia. The guy said to me, how long you been a second lieutenant? I says, ever since my captain was pissed off at me, and I explained the trouble. Whereas I should have been made a first lieutenant like in 90 days, and then 60 days after that I was supposed to be a captain. So when I got to my new squadron, that's the way it was. I got first lieutenant. I have a picture of me with big aluminum bars on my shoulder that my crew gave me when I finally made it. They all knew what the hell was
the story.
Oh yeah, they all knew the story. and it was good for them because from my standpoint.
But the Army recognized that you knew what you were doing. They gave you the responsibility.
Oh yeah,
even
though I didn't have the title.
You didn't have the title. They gave you the responsibility.
I had the full responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just. I mean, this whole conversation's in a vacuum, and I want to just bring it back. There's so many things I want to talk, and I would like to get on tape. Can we change topics temporarily and then come back to the war?
Of course.
All right. So, I want to go back, you know, I want to go back as far as you can go back. And then I want to come forward more slowly.
All right.
So, because that gives me the context of other things. So,
maybe you want to start out when I was in high school, let's say.
Well, no, I was going to go, I'm trying to go back further.
Oh, well, okay.
I want to go back. I'm trying to go back as far as I can. So let me come back to. You were born in Nashville.
Nashville, Tennessee.
And actually, at some point, I want to pull you back to what you know about your parents, my grandparents. But I don't know whether this is the time, but maybe do, do you know how your parents got to Nashville, or what the story is?
Pretty much. My mother and father both were born in Russia. And my father lived in a suburb of Moscow. I'm not sure where my mother grew up. She came to this country and she already had relatives here in this country. And in my case,
Do you have
I
any
was
idea?
born,
Do you have any idea what year she came over?
I would guess sometime in the late 1918, no, it must have been after that, 1920 to 21.
No, it's got to be earlier, dude. You were born in 1919. You mean 1909?
1909, excuse me.
Yeah. Let me. Do you think she was born in 1890? Is that your best guess?
Well, my mother was 97 when she died. She died, wow, she died about,
Now 1987.
I don't want to guess, Arthur.
Okay.
I don't want to guess.
Let me come back. So when she came here, she was a young woman,
Right.
and
She lived in the Bronx,
she lived in the Bronx.
and because the relatives on her side of the family were in the dress business,
Okay.
and that's how my father got into it.
Okay. And then how did she get from there to Nashville? Do you have any idea
Well,
how that all occurred?
my father came to this country, and he tells a story that his father kicked him out of the house when he was about 14 years old, and because he says gave mach a living, which means go earn a living, and
Did they speak Yiddish?
yes.
In other words, was Yiddish their
Yeah,
preferred language?
Yeah, Yiddish was their preferred language, my father.
Yeah.
Although he spoke Russian too,
Right.
but he spoke Yiddish.
Yiddish, yeah.
And so he wound up in Moscow, and he was a good student, and had graduated high school. And actually, he was tutoring other kids. He
He finished high school even though he was only 14?
No, but he was like 18, 19
At that point.
At that point.
Right.
He was tutoring kids, but the draft came along. So he had actually, they drafted him even though he was out of town back at his hometown.
Do you know what his hometown was?
No,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
But it was in the neighborhood, you think, of Moscow?
Yes.
It wasn't in the Ukraine then. It was in Russia itself.
Oh, in Russia, yeah, no question.
It wasn't in the Ukraine.
No, Moscow.
Okay, I thought for some reason they were from the Ukraine. Yeah.
No. But as let's put it this way. So when it came to be drafted, um, my father's family hired a blind man, and what happens is the Russians sent some officers, say, from the army, and he had a list of people that were eligible to be drafted
Right.
in the particular village that he was at.
Right.
And they would read them out their names in public, and everybody hugged and kissed everybody, and they were wound up going off to the draft. In my father's case, the family hired a blind man, and when it came to saying his name, Yankel Lokomovich, the blind man stepped forward. Okay, and so they excused him. The way I heard it, like in the next 15 minutes, he was on the way out of Russia, and
Your father was?
My father was. He walked all the way to the Polish border, okay, and at that point hooked up with some kind of transportation. I mean,
What year do you think he was born in? Also 1890?
he was a little, maybe earlier, Arthur. I really don't remember.
Okay.
I'll look it up, okay?
Okay.
Um, as I said, when he got to Poland, he was able to get transportation, that is, train, whatever the hell was available. And he got into Germany, and at one of the ports, and took a ship to the U.S. And at that time,
From Germany?
From Germany.
Oh, so
And
I
landed.
don't know where. I saw
and-
some people went out to France or something.
No,
It's from Germany.
from Germany.
So they're going out the North Sea or whatever it is.
Yeah, they went out the North Sea and went across the ocean in a regular ship. And he had some relatives in Nashville, Tennessee. So when he got to New York, he had some money and rubles, which he exchanged. He got some dollars and bought a train ticket to Nashville. And he was a peddler.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that, but let me just, I'm going to come back to that. Let me just go to this earlier part of the story because it seems a little inconsistent about what I might have heard before. I understand his family kicked him out, but and he always, one second, and he held it against him, if I understand correctly. The rest of his life or no?
No.
I thought because what you're saying now is they helped protect him from the army.
Oh, that's exactly what they did. Oh, no question. I remember pictures.
So wasn't they kicked him out of their home?
Oh,
no, they kicked him out in the sense they wanted him to go to work.
They wanted to go to work, and they felt that
instead of staying in school.
No, he was drafted. Right. He would wind up in the army.
Right, but the story I had before was that at a very young age they kicked him out and said you got to go to work and we can't no longer feed you.
Oh yeah, as he says, they said to him "mach levin," which means
make a living.
Make a living, and they shipped him off to Moscow, and he was on his own. But what he did was.
But they were still in touch with him.
Oh yeah, no question, all the way through till he was up to draft age.
Okay.
In fact,
do you know his parents' names?
I'll have to really dig my memory.
If you come up with that, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
But you never met them. They never came across to this country.
No. My father, though, actually sent money back home to his sister in Russia. Well, I can remember that. Well, when we
How many
lived-
brothers and sisters did he have? Do you have any idea?
I think he had one sister. I'm not familiar with.
Did you ever meet her?
No.
And you don't know her name either?
At one stage, I guess I did, because he used to write a letter to her and mail her a check every month. Excuse me, I shouldn't say sister. It was his mother.
His mother.
Yeah, his mother. Somewheres.
But you don't know her name, and you don't know how she died or when she died or anything like that.
No, I'm not familiar with that. I know she was still alive when I was all the way through high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And but your grandfather, you think he had deceased by that time? Is that the sense you had?
Yes.
So
Yes.
she was alone.
Yeah. In fact, at some stage of the game, I thought I have a picture, which I'll give to you, of her. He had a picture of her next to his bed.
I thought there's a picture of you with one of your grandparents. Isn't there a picture of you with one of your grandparents? When you
Yeah,
were very
but I
young?
think that was
Your
my
mother's mother?
Yes,
Your mother's mother?
yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Okay. So your father's parents stayed in Russia.
Right.
Not sure when they died. You're not sure their name. They lived, you think, in a town that was outside of Moscow.
All I
Any
know
idea
is
what
their
kind of-
name. All I know about it is the name was Lukamovich.
Lukamovich was the
Right.
name.
Right. I think it was my father's name, and how he wound up in this country, Levine or who. Oh, excuse me. It's coming back.
Good.
Nothing like memory. When he arrived in this country, and he was being interviewed by
This is Ellis Island.
Ellis Island, he was being interviewed by
Yeah, we're officer.
the immigration group,
Right.
and they asked him his name, and he said Lukamovich, and they asked him, what is your mother's maiden name, and he said Levine.
Huh.
The family name was Levine, and so they gave him the name of Jacob Levine.
So Levine was his mother's name.
Right. Wasn't Lukamovich?
But Levine was a name, though, of the family then. It wasn't.
Oh yeah. In fact, there were some relatives, and my father. I was always mad at him for all my life. There was a family in Brooklyn by the name of Luck, the front end of Lukamovich. They came to this country earlier.
Like L-U-K or?
No, L-U-C-K.
Luck.
Just like the
Right.
word luck. Good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah.
They lived in Brooklyn,
Right.
and my father was talking all his life about going to Brooklyn and meeting him. He had some
What
kind
was
of.
what was the relation?
All I know is they were part of my father's family in Russia.
Right.
I
You don't know
know-
mother's side, father's side.
I don't know anything about it.
But he also had relatives in Tennessee, or he just had other contact in Tennessee.
No, he had some other relatives in Tennessee.
Okay.
And
So he started out as a peddler in New York.
no, he never peddled in New York. He peddled in Nashville, Tennessee.
So he went to Tennessee
Right.
pretty quickly. He came in Ellis Island. He didn't spend much time in New York.
No, almost immediately got to Tennessee.
So
And I can always remember the story because he always complained that he bought clothes. What he was doing was peddling clothes
right,
on a wagon,
right,
and he had a horse. Okay,
right.
This horse's name was Joe. When I was born, my mother had a fit, but he still had to, when they got married there, she says, either I'm going or I'm taking the kid, or you get rid of the goddamn horse. So
why did she want so anxious
she
to
didn't
get a
want
horse?
she didn't want the horse and me couldn't have the same name. That was it.
I see.
And when my mother was stubborn,
Who were you named after, though? You weren't named after the horse.
well, it's somebody in my father's family who I have no idea.
Okay. It was in your father's family, you think, not your mother's. You won't swear to that either.
I won't swear to that. I'm under that impression. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
Although I can't say my memory is.
Did they tell you anything about what his parents did for a living, or?
I have no idea. Absolutely zero.
They were not well-to-do, though.
No, definitely not. I think they were more like farmers or something like that.
They were peasants of some
Yeah,
kind.
peasants or something.
So, what year do you think he arrived in Nashville?
I know that he was in Nashville at the time of the war. I'm talking about
By 1915? I mean, your parents have to have met, got married, and all that before you're born. So we know that it's a couple years must be.
Yeah, it was, what the heck, I was born in 1919.
Right.
So, and I remember Nashville quite well. We lived very close to Vanderbilt University.
I'm going to come back to your memory. I'm going to come back to your memory of that in a minute. I just want to go. I'm going to tease this back though with your father just one more minute. Jeanette seemed to know the story, and I'm going to get this from her about how your parents met. Do you have any idea how your parents met? Do you know anything about that story?
Only to this extent.
Yeah.
My father opened a store in Nashville. I mean, he evolved from peddling clothes. He opened a store in Nashville.
He made enough money with the peddling that he could buy a store?
Yes, he opened a store in Nashville. Called Levine's Ready to Wear.
Okay.
And that is, in other words, he sold skirts and blouses and that type of thing in the store in Nashville.
Right.
And when he came to New York, I don't know all the ramifications and how it began and ended. He visited the manufacturers of the clothes.
Right.
And my mother worked there somehow or other.
This was in Nashville or New York?
No, in New York.
Okay.
Okay. And one of my favorite trips as a kid, and I mean really when I was a kid, was taking a train from Nashville. I never slept a wink. It was a Pullman car. I never slept a wink, but it's the fondest memories I ever had of watching all the stations go by and everything on the way into the city. And my favorite trip was to come up here.
How long did that trip take?
It would be something like, I'd say, early evening as you got on the train. I just got clipped by a coconut.
Sorry.
What do you call it? I'd say I made that trip at least a half a dozen times.
So if you left in the early evening, when would you get in the morning?
Yeah, it got in like 10 o'clock or something like that.
10 a.m.?
10 a.m.
So it would take all night.
Oh yeah, it was all night. It was an all-night trip.
Yeah. And you would stay awake.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I was sleepy as hell when I got up. I'm
How old
sure
were you then?
well, I think
What
let's
year did
say
you leave Nashville? That will give you an idea.
when did we
How
leave?
old were you when you left?
Let me think. I came up here and when I went to the fourth grade.
Okay. So you were there until through third grade.
Yeah,
So you must have been, I'm calculating, I don't know if it's similar, but 8 or 9 years old or something like that, or
something like
10?
that. 10.
And okay. So, um, what do you remember from Nashville days? You said you knew the street you lived on, or you?
3419 Murphy Road.
Okay.
1 block away from Vanderbilt University.
Okay.
What do I remember about it? All the trees on the street were poplar trees. You know, it's like a big circle
Uh-huh.
straight up in the air. It didn't have branches growing out. It looked almost more like a bush.
Wow.
In fact, when we got up here, the first thing I said to everybody was, where the hell are the trees? The maples and oak and ash and pine trees were all farm. The whole street was lined. I went to the John B. Ransom School in Nashville,
Okay. That was elementary school.
elementary school. Can remember it for 2 reasons. I may remember it very well. I can remember being in a class in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and the teacher said, how many people are Christian, how many are Catholic, and how many people are Jewish in the class. And I think there were 4 kids in the class. There was, I don't know, I'm guessing 25 kids altogether that were Jewish. And I was kind of a terror when I was a kid. My father bought me a top, which spins. What it is you have something like a semicircle made out of aluminum with a stem on it. And you put it into like a cylinder, which had and you wound it up. And you pushed on the edge of the stem, and it would come out and spin all over the wall. Well, I got fascinated with electricity real quickly and got a nice shock out of it. One day I had nothing else to do, and the outlets in those days, we didn't have a receptacle where you had 2 prongs going in. It was hollow. In other words, you literally could have taken a light bulb and put it on the floor where the receptacle was and get a light. So I decided, well, I'll take this top and put it in there and see what happens. So I did. And of course,
It conducted electricity to you.
not only did I get a shock, but I blew the fuses in the cellar. So
How old were you then?
Oh, 5, 6, something like that.
Did you have any people that you remember from those days besides your parents? And your sister was born,
My sister was born there.
right, so how many years younger is she? She's about 3, 4 years younger?
Let's see. Maybe I can do it in a different way, Arthur. When I was a junior in college, my sister was I got a date for her with my best friend in Detroit. And she came out to the, what do you call it, the junior ball.
Uh-huh.
And the guy's name was Teddy Leibowitz. He's no longer around.
Well, she must be 3-4 years younger than you are.
Oh yeah, I was.
When was Aaron? I'm sorry, I don't know the ages. How about Aaron? Was he a little bit younger than she was?
No, Aaron.
Aaron's in between.
Aaron was only about a year and a half younger than me.
Okay. So it was you, and then he was born a year or two after, and then she was born a year or two after that, most
Right,
likely?
in that kind of.
In that kind of order.
And I'm not sure of the exact time frame, but that's close.
What else do you remember from Tennessee? Remember any people or any places or?
I remember taking a trolley car to visit my father's store in downtown Nashville. He was on the Four Corners.
Uh-huh.
And it's a major intersection.
Right.
It's like Broad Market in New York.
He was in a very central location in Nashville.
In Nashville, right.
He was quite a successful in his business there.
He was a successful business there, and he was a successful business in Summit.
What do you ascribe his success to? Or what did he subscribe to?
Well, I think a lot of Jewish kids in business were very, I don't know, they felt uncomfortable in a Christian neighborhood overall, and they tend to be clannish.
Right.
My father was a Mason. In fact, I'll never forget this story. He was I think the second highest degree Mason there could be, 32nd or 33rd degree or something else like that. And when he came to Summit and went to the Masons, they said, we have no place for you. Your rank is so far above us.
Right.
There's nobody in between.
Right.
And you're not supposed to be associated with us so much as the in-between.
Right.
So they said, well, try Morristown. So we went to Morristown, and they only went up to something like the 20th degree.
Oh.
So they said to him, you're going to have to go to New York City. But he went through that whole rigmarole. So, the Masons were quite a liberal organization. There was no segregation within it. I mean, at least as far as religion goes, or anything like that. But my father just gave it up. There was nothing else to do. But
you're saying as a result of being a Mason, he was more exposed to a more broad community?
Broad community. I mean, he wasn't... he had lots of friends in the business community in Summit, which weren't... Although a lot of the dress shops and the shoe shops and a couple of the grocery stores, the families were Jewish, But if you were talking about a stationery store, or you're talking about a photographic shop, other types, there were no Jews involved in Summit, as I remember.
Right. Well, Summit, by the time I knew it, was a pretty hoity-toity community.
Yeah, right. And
I'm not saying Nashville isn't, I'm just saying Summit is a pretty exclusive community.
I did my best in school, and first year I actually, the year I graduated, I couldn't make up my mind. My
This,
father
you're
said
talking graduated from high school now?
high school. My father was talking to the advisor at school, and she said, you ought to go to Stevens Institute in Hoboken, and they have aptitude tests there that you could take, because I wanted to
What
be
what year? 1 second. What year would you have graduated high school?
37.
Okay.
So I went to Stevens Institute there, and my father, the test took 4 hours over 2 days, 4 hours each day for 2 days. It cost my father $40 to get the test.
Quite a bit of money
Which was a lot of money, I mean,
in those days.
in those days. And they said.
But he did it because you were trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life.
Right. I really, nothing, I was open. I had no,
Direction.
I felt comfortable with tools. I felt comfortable in retail. I wasn't afraid of anything. I mean, no matter what they had said. And they said, well, you should take a combination of business and engineering. So, and they said you ought to look at, if you'd like to be a little bit more in engineering, why don't you try Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania.
1 second. So Stevens was in Hoboken?
Yeah.
So you traveled in
Stevens
by,
Tech.
you went in by train or
Oh
something?
yeah, actually.
By train?
Oh yeah, I used to be traveling. I wasn't afraid to go anywhere. So I
Right,
took a train.
right.
So my father was kind of skeptical about my taking the test. First of all, it cost $40, which was a lot of money, but what the results would be. And so I went to Penn.
So they recommended, they said, yeah, well, you must have been a good student because you can't just go to Penn without being a decent student.
Oh,